G'day folks, welcome to the round 23 preview edition of Footy Rants. I'm Benny Matthews. I don't want to waste any time. I'm going to dive straight into the preview for this week's NRL action. Our first game we see here, we've got the Rabbitohs up against the Bulldogs tonight in Thursday night footy. Look, doesn't really impact the competition at all. You're simply playing for pride, and you've probably got two clubs that are desperate to put on decent performances for their respective coaches. You know, both coaches in Hasler and Maguire have come under severe scrutiny in media circles around their legitimacy as leaders of their respective clubs. And you know, the Rabbitohs have probably responded a little bit better than what the Bulldogs have. They're really down in the dumps. And you know, we sort of have a look at this lineup now from Souths. Questioned the moves of their spine a couple of weeks ago. It didn't work first hit out. Managed to salvage a win last week. No doubt that late win against the Dragons will give them some confidence. But you know, these two clubs, they've sort of tussled back and forth in their last 8 encounters, so they're 4 apiece. We actually saw the Bulldogs get one of their few victories on the, I believe it was the Easter clash earlier in the year, and they actually won 24 points to 9. Came from behind and stole the cookies for that one. But yeah, we look at the lineups. There's been no changes outside of Heimel Hunt. So Gray comes in to the centres, Fuimauno into the centres, and Campbell Graham keeps his spot after debuting last week, and he's a big tall thing. So you know, as far as an attacking weapon goes, I think these two sides are very much structured to be attack versus defence. So it's pretty much who can execute on their greatest skill set. Like we say week after week, the Bulldogs are never really going to go out and get pumped. Even though they did lose 20 points to 4 last week, you know, it was 2 penalty goals in the second half. Otherwise, you know, a try could have really broken the game open, but it just never really came. And if we scroll down to the Bulldogs lineup, again, no changes, but we see that Michael Leisha will remain in that reserve spot. So whether there are any late changes to this spine, you know, there won't be obviously any movement from Hopewadi at the back. But yeah, they're persisting with Reynolds and Stanley in the 6 and 7 jerseys. Chase Stanley is no NRL half. He's just simply missed too much footy through injury, and he hasn't spent enough time in that position to genuinely warrant that position. If I was Frawley, I'd actually be a little bit pissed off that I was coming off the bench, considering, you know, the little bit of impact that he did bring to the side when he first burst onto the scene in that utility role, admittedly. But I think he definitely earned his starting position, and I'd have him there. To be honest, I'd probably have Moses back in the halves, and I'd play Reynolds at 9, get him in and around the ruck, and let the grub do what the grub does. I love what he brings to the game and the passion, and it's a shame that he's going to go out a Bulldog without seeing finals footy in 2017. So yeah, attack versus defence. Who can execute better? I'm leaning towards the Rabbitohs simply based off momentum. They'll have their tails up a little bit, stealing the victory from a side who was very much pushing for a top 8 spot in the Dragons last week. So yeah, I'll look for the Bunnies to push over the top of the Doggies yet again. In our second game, so we move to Friday night, Parramatta versus the Newcastle Knights. You know, a little bit of a danger game. Yes, I know it's a little bit trivial, and it's quite easy to laugh off the Newcastle Knights, even despite them coming off back-to-back wins for the first time in a couple of years. A big positive for Parramatta, no changes to that lineup. Bevan French is sweet to go with that slight hammy niggle that he had in the first half last week. But yeah, starts again. We do see Hoffman named in the reserves, so perhaps there is potential there that maybe he isn't 100% and they're just covering their asses just in case they need to have a bit of a reshuffle. And Will Smith is there as well. So, you know, that indicates to me the fact that both those guys are there. You know, if Bevan French is ruled out, Norman would go to 1 and Smith would come into the halves with Mitchell Moses. So that's not entirely out of the question. But as we can see from the top there, Newcastle Knights, vast outsiders at $5.75 head-to-head. But hey, if you're looking for value for the week, that's definitely it. I'll tell you what, Newcastle have actually won 6 of the last 8 encounters against Parramatta, and Parramatta only won those 2 games by 12 points or less. So when they have ran away with the cheese, it hasn't been by a great deal. So Parramatta 1 to 12 is actually paying $3.50 versus $1.60 13 plus. So there may be a bit of value there to be had if we think that Newcastle may steal at least a bit of a better performance than what they giving warrants for in the betting stakes. So we scroll down. Obviously, where that head-to-head blowout comes is the loss of Nathan Ross. So with that nasty back injury that he caught with that knee to the back last week, there's been a bit of a reshuffle at the back. So Dane Gagai moves to fullback. Joe Wardle comes back into the side in centres in place of Gagai's reshuffle, and Sean Kennydale's back in the side with Chanel Mataudia missing out. So it's pretty much just a reshuffle of the back five. Otherwise, nothing else changes at all for Newcastle. So, plenty of positives there. Jamie Buren and Danny Levi seem to be sorting out their rotation quite nicely for Coach Nathan Brown. Brock Lamb had a screamer last week, so if him and Hodkinson can replicate some sort of stability and control in their style of play and finish with the likes of Gagai and Kennydale, whether Gagai can have that same influence with Sean Kennydale as they have had in their first few games with him playing fullback is a question we don't know the answer to just yet, but it's definitely not out of the realms of possibility. He's coming off the back of such a good representative year, but at times, comes up with fundamental errors as a senior representative player in this relatively inexperienced Newcastle side. So, my challenge is for Gagai to perform at that level that we know he can, and he has done at representative level for his club side in Newcastle. But outside of those things, whilst I did present cases of narrower margins, I do think that reshuffle is just going to cause that little bit of disruption, that little bit of clunkiness of guys in, guys out, guys in, guys out. It's going to play in the favour of Parramatta, who don't really need to make any changes. If Bevan French is ruled out, however, I would seriously consider that 1 to 12 market. But otherwise, it's a Parramatta victory for mine, and they'll go on their way, and that will make it 7 wins in a row for the side. So, their stake for a top 4 finish definitely increases with a victory against Newcastle this week. Second Friday night game up here in Suncorp, up in Brisbane. Broncos versus the Cronulla Sharks. The only change that we see for the Brisbane Broncos is Joe Offengawi. He's out 3 weeks through suspension for that spear tackle. So they persist with that spine lineup of Boyd, Nikorima, Hunt, and Milford. Ben Hunt has been named to start in 9, even though he didn't start last week and still managed that hat-trick. It'd be interesting to see after that performance that he did bring once coming on, whether he's rewarded with a starting jersey. I thought it was a little bit odd starting Alex Glenn at 9. I think, if you've got a guy who can do that for your side, yes, it was a disappointing performance from the Titans, but, you still got to put yourselves in the right position to score 3 tries in the NRL. So yeah, Offengawi's out. Jai Arrow comes into that reserves position in the forwards. Otherwise, they're the same. Pros and cons for the changes inside the Cronulla lineup. Notable omissions is Jack Bird. So Jack Bird's out, but I actually like his replacement in Kurt Cable. I thought he was really unlikely to get dropped last week. I thought he's been one of their most consistent players in what's been up and down performances over the last few weeks for Cronulla. Other additions is James Maloney. That's pivotal. Absolutely pivotal. We've seen how different this Cronulla side is when he's not out there leading them. So been missing the last few weeks with a broken hand, and that creates that little reshuffle. So Moo Brown goes back to 9, and Seguiaro is pinned back to the bench. With the expectation of Jaden Brayley coming back next week from that broken jaw, these two in Brown and Seguiaro are really on show for their coach in Shane Flanagan. One of those guys isn't going to be in the 17 next week. Simply, I can't see that they would try and bring Brayley back through reserve grade. I think he proved himself as a junior player of the club far too well, and the fact that he was playing in front of Seguiaro even when Seguiaro did get signed. But yeah, for me, areas where the Sharks can really ascend is going to be obviously just that consistency. I think they're really posed to come together as a side that prides themselves on the ruthless execution of a game plan in Cronulla versus the flamboyancy and youth that Wayne Bennett boasts about. And we've seen this week in the press out a bit of a swipe at Shane Flanagan actually in regards to Jack Bird coming here and be able to play his own style of footy, and that they're not restricted to any sort of structure. And I think there is pros and cons to that. I think when things are really working, you see how you can actually put a team to the sword like the Broncos did last week. But in contrast, I think everyone was quite quick to forget, yes, they've had 2 big wins in the last 3 weeks, but one of those losses was they blew a 12-point lead against Parramatta and got absolutely pants. Didn't even look like winning the game in the next 70 minutes after they got off to an absolute flyer. So for me, that raises big flags. Are they a genuine threat? If they go out and beat the Sharks at home here, and it's been quite an inverse relationship, much like Cronulla shared with the Raiders last week. The Sharkies actually have won the last 3 at Suncorp, but the Broncos have had 2 wins out of the last 3 encounters, and they were both in Cronulla. So, you pick one or the other there, but the fact that James Maloney's back, I think him and Townsend complement each other really well. If the forward pack, which we know the experience that they bring, can get over the top of this Brisbane pack that, sort of lacks a little bit of mongrel at time. I've given Offengawi and Pangai Jr. big raps over the last few weeks. So if they can come on and bring that urgency to the pack that Brisbane so desperately need, especially at times when Sims and Blair don't fire. I think that's sort of been my only criticism of those guys, is their lack of consistency at times. So yeah, big opportunities for the Sharks to win that arm wrestle in the first 20, gain some ascendancy, and I think just the ruthless execution and dogged nature of that team that knows how to win, I think they can definitely run over the top of them, especially at the price that they're chasing. Head-to-head, $2.85, and 1 to 12, I think they're paying like $3.75. So massive value there in the betting stakes, and I'd seriously consider at least looking at Cronulla Sharks head-to-head. That's going to be my tip anyway. I'll definitely be getting on the Sharkies bandwagon. I think they've got the goods, and even without Jack Bird, I think they can cause some trouble. As long as Jared Beale can hold up defensively against Corey Oates, I think they'll find themselves in good stead. Dragons versus the Titans. Wow. Okay, so this poses as a real crossroads for the Dragons. If they lose to the Titans here, they've got the Broncos next week. If they lose this game, I don't see them making the 8. So this is a crossroads for their season. After starting so well and being like, oh, look what McGregor's done. He's finally turned this club around. They're only a finals campaign away to receiving Ben Hunt and being able to build into this next dynasty, having signed him for such a long period of time. So, I guess big pluses is just trying to stick to your guns and pick that same 17. So we see Dufty at 1 again. Dugan hasn't seemed to succumb to that injury that forced him from the field against the Rabbitohs last week. But yeah, I think it was just a sense of complacency, really. They switched off. They thought 2 tries in the last 5 minutes. This isn't going to happen. We're back to our winning ways, and away we go. We've got the Titans next week, so they're another team that's outside the top 8, and then we can focus on the Broncos then. They didn't pay the Rabbitohs the respect that they needed in the players that they do still possess. Guys like Reynolds and Sutton and Burgess, those guys have won premierships, so they definitely just switched off. This forward pack for mine can definitely play over the top of what the Titans bring. Big pluses for the Titans is the addition of Kevin Proctor, particularly defensively. A lot of scrutiny has come to this club with Neil Henry reportedly losing the respect of the dressing shed, so that being the playing group itself. So it'll be interesting to see how much truth there is to those rumours. I guess that will be evidenced in the results that we see over the last month of footy before finals begin. But yeah, I guess the challenge is, Wallace, James and Proctor to take it to the Dragons forward pack. Again, that pretty much dictates how the Dragons perform. If they can keep that consistency around the middle, that's when the fluency comes with their outside backs. They've still got serious attacking potential in the likes of, Dugan, Nene McDonald, Dufty. Widdop as a half, his running game's phenomenal. He can absolutely tear a team apart with his own prowess. So, you reverse the ledger, and there's absolute attacking potency in this Titan side, but we haven't seen it for the last 6 weeks plus, and that's what concerns me. The Gold Coast did enjoy a 20 points to 10 victory earlier this season, and again alluding back to the Kevin Proctor edition, but I'm just not too sure. I think the seriousness of this game and what's on the line. If the Dragons really want to make a push and find their way back inside the 8, this game is a given. It's a must. It's got to happen. Whether they can do it convincingly, I'm not sold on. So I'll be taking the Dragons 1-12. Storm versus Roosters. This is a tasty little game. I'm really fucking excited for this one simply because how vastly considered the Roosters are as outsiders in this match. So we see there $1.37 for the Storm. So not much value really in the ways of head-to-head into the Roosters $3.20. And that comes through no changes from the Melbourne Storm and a big win over the Cowboys last week. Admittedly, Cowboys did lose a couple early on, and they really exploited Chambers over the top of Cohen Hess in the centres when he was defending there. So Riley Jacks finds his way into the side again. He'll actually come up against his former club, played a bit of 20s for the Roosters. But, I say it week after week. Any club that can put the same 17 out, they're definitely putting themselves in a positive position to move forward and take victory. Post this on the other side, you say that the Roosters are only missing one player, but this only has been a massive, massive part of their attacking setup, and that's Daniel Tupou. So with the absence of Michael Gordon still, that back five changes quite dramatically. So we see Joe Manu move to the wing and Mitch Orbison comes into centre. I don't think Manu is as effective when he plays on the wing. Just because he's got that great in and away, that short feed at the line, I think that's where he's utilised best and why he has been playing centres. When you contrast that against Latrell Mitchell, who's got, a big fend, he's got that kicking game when he gets on the outside of his opposition centre. I just think Mitch Orbison's never going to lose you a game, and yes, he's quite effective at finding the line when he does get played in the back line. But is it the most optimal for what the Roosters require for this time of the year and versus this opposition? More ticks in the boxes as far as selections go. Boyd Coyden back, Jake Friend's back, and I suspect Kane Evans will probably play as well. He hasn't been named in the 17, but I would find it surprising unless they're concerned about whether Jake Friend can play 80. But his sheer workload before he got injured was that high anyway. I think he's going to come back and be fine. So unless Radley's been named, he does play in the middle for 20. So whether they just want to add him in there, he has been quite dogged in his last 3 outings at the start of his NRL career. So whether they want to try and utilise that, that's something that has to be taken into consideration. So yeah, don't be surprised if Kane Evans is thrown in there just as to combat another big body. The Melbourne Storm pack is far from small. So that's got to be taken into consideration. The finishing capabilities of Tupou and just the dynamic that back five has when they're all there in conjunction with the running games and kicking games of Keary and Pearce, I think that is vital. And that's what's going to lead me to swing back towards the Melbourne Storm. I think they're just looking a little bit too strong at the moment. Melbourne Storm, 3 in a row at the moment. This will make it 4. They come into Newcastle next week, so big opportunities to go 5 in a row. When you're putting together chunks of succession that close to finals football, it's only a good thing for your club and the culture of that winning procession moving forward. So on the other hand, Roosters are facing 3 losses in a row. Really unexpected after the way they started against Manly. So that'll be added motivation. You're never going to have any more motivation for Warrior Hargraves and Dylan Napa than the Melbourne Storm forward pack as far as standards go. So, look for those guys to have a really big start to the game, but it's those guys off the bench that really need to step up a gear. And I think Madison, now having spent his time in place of Captain Boyd Cordner, can sort of be that little bit of punch. But, when I see those names, Tedavano, Takiaho, and Ryan Madison and Radley, I'm not overly intimidated. We sort of scroll back up to the bench of the Melbourne Storm: Kenny Bromwich, Asafa Solomona, McLean, and Griffin. Just like out and out fucking giant bodies, and all have offloads. So super potent. So I think that in itself sort of explains what the Roosters are up against. They may be able to handle the first wave, but can they handle the next 2 or 3 after that? That's the real question that I pose. So yeah, I'm leaning towards Melbourne Storm 1-12. I think the Roosters will stay in it. It's just simply from the added confidence of having Cordner and Friend back, but won't quite be enough missing Tupou. Panthers and the Cowboys. Now, I'm assuming a lot of people have already drawn a line through the Cowboys now, and I may be barraged for being a one-eyed Cowboy supporter in my position on this game, but $2.85 outsiders. Yes, I know Cooper and Winterstein are now out after succumbing to injuries within the first 10 minutes last week. And again, Panthers are ticking that box that I like to see ticked off, that there's no changes. Mind you, Matt Moylan has been named in that reserves list again, so he must be getting closer and closer to getting a start. Outside of that, there won't be any changes, and if there are, that'll just be a straight swap. Moylan would come in for Tyrone May, I would assume. But yeah, looking at the inclusion of Javid Bowen, I don't think you really lose too much losing Winterstein for Javid Bowen. It's just a different skill set. If anything, Bowen's taller, he's going to have a jump, he's got that speed long term, whereas, Winterstein is a great defensive winger. He's got that short, stout sort of build that he can sort of drive over the top of defensive players when he's looking for the line. But at the same time, Bowen's going to be able to score those sort of freaky jump outside the sideline sort of tries like we see Cole Felt do. So I think they complement each other quite well. And if we're going to see a club that's going to dig in and overcome adversity, who better than the North Queensland Cowboys? And I mean that genuinely. So whilst you are missing the experience now on top of Thurston, Matt Scott, we now add to the list Gavin Cooper. But hey, hardly the fucking worst replacement in Cohen Hess coming on. So Ben Hampton finds his way back into the 17, and that'll simply just to be able to combat the 80 minutes that Jake Granville was forced to play through around the tiring forward pack because of Gavin Cooper's absence as well. So, Sam Hoare comes into that lineup. Fensom goes back to the bench. So you got Asiata and Bolton up front. I really like their chances. The Cowboys have won 7 of their last 8. They won 16-14 earlier in the season where they came from behind. Ethan Lowe kicked the goal from the sideline to win the match. And the Panthers' only win in those last 8 starts was only by a point, and that was back in 2014. So I guess my question to Penrith is, does that youth and inexperience, when you're coming up a side now where you're expected to win, how do you basically create space in that mentality of now that pressure is like you need to go out and win? And, it's sort of either way. Penrith are inside now. They've just achieved it. Can they hold that standard now? And, the Cowboys are on the slide. How do they go at fighting off an opponent that's in a dogfight with them? What sort of caution are they going to throw to the wind to their challenges? Because they've got the Sharks next week. So it's not going to get any easier, especially if they snag an upset against the Broncos. So, best case here, they've got to be thinking, we get a win here, the Broncos get a win against the Sharks, they're really down and out, they're two losses in a row, we can take advantage of that, and all of a sudden, we've got our season back on track. So that's the mentality I'd be taking as a North Queensland Cowboy, and as a supporter, I very much hope that my players are as well. So I'm going to be a biased bloke here and tip an upset with the Cowboys 1-12. Warriors, Raiders. Big opportunities for Raiders to continue on their way and really push for a top 8 spot. The Warriors down and out, being a confidence-based side, getting rolled by the cellar dwellers in Newcastle last week, despite still the experience that they possess in this side. It speaks volumes, the fact that Isaac Luke's been dropped back to the bench for Nathaniel Roach. He's the international 9 and he's not even in his starting 17 anymore. A little bit like Robbie Farah, I suppose, for Souths. A bit of a fall from grace for those two players. But I just think the Raiders being the momentum side that they are and going just about the full 80 with the Storm a few weeks ago and now generating 2 wins off the back of that, their tails are really up. And I think that speaks volumes, I guess, for the patience of a coach like Ricky Stewart. When shit's getting tough, he's happy to take the brunt for his players, especially in a media sense. He's happy to take those guys on. He's not afraid of them. The Raiders have won the last 3. The Warriors had actually won the last 5 prior to those. They won 20-8 earlier in the season. Warriors facing Six losses in a row, but as I've already alluded to, Raiders 3 in a row. They can really start to leverage some momentum. Pluses for the Warriors in a small sense. Ryan Hoffman makes his return, which will help bolster up that defensive edge, especially when they're trying to combat the opposing edge of guys like Whitehead popping up with Leilua and Rapana. So yeah, it's interesting to see that Whitehead goes back into lock, Tarpanay into the back row. So still no Soliola. So we'll see him. I think he's due back in that last round, which coincidentally they do play the Melbourne Storm. So yeah, they're continuing their ways around those boys. Kurt Baptiste still in that reserve hooking role with Josh Hodgson, and yeah, when you've got blokes like Dave Taylor coming off the bench, he could really be a live wire that could potentially open this game up, especially if Josh Hodgson continues his running game in the potency that it has been in the past. So yeah, I really like the Raiders here, and I think they can do a job and shoot out to a 13+ win yet again. Tigers versus Manly. Again, it's a bit of a flip of the coin. Who out of the clubs that are out of the finals race now are going to be able to overcome these teams that are on the up? Manly with a bit of a shock win against the Roosters last week after, starting well, but then for the next 25 minutes getting obliterated after finally overcoming the next 50 really, really substantially against the Roosters last week. Manly have experienced 6 of the last 8 victories between these two clubs. They did beat the Tigers 28-16 earlier in the season. But, to contrast that, the Tigers were far from terrible against Penrith last week. And I think that's another big reason why the Cowboys will be feeling confident against Penrith. But yeah, to get back to this game, yeah, the Tigers, they were in it for most of the game. They were down by 2 points with like 6 minutes to go. And then Penrith just went bang, bang. And all of a sudden the scoreboard looks like, a bit of a comfy win for Penrith. We see no changes, so that's a plus again in my books. That's consistency moving forward. You've still got the likes of Tedesco. Norfoluma picked up a double last week, so his finishing capability can't be questioned. The youth coming through in Hassan Masters, Nguama's proven himself season after season. I guess the consistency in the game management of these halves and Lolohea and Brooks, that's where the difference lies when you're coming up against DCE and Blake Green. If Lolohea can execute properly and doesn't come up with these silly plays where he just has the habit of running overs and whatnot, but more importantly, I thought where Manly really developed their momentum last week was their interchange forwards coming on. And I actually really like the interchange forwards for the Tigers in Alex Twal, Suaso Su and Michael Cheekamp. So if they can come on and match the likes, if we scroll down to the Manly bench in Lewis Brown, Lloyd Perrott and Darcy Lussick and Fanua Blake, if they can match those guys for pace and intensity once Tapau and Lawrence head off from their first stints, I really give the Tigers a chance. Whether they can go on and win, I think that's a different sort of question, especially when we're comparing Manly versus the Penrith Panthers. I think Manly themselves bring a lot more structure and dynamic play as far as where they can hurt you. When you've got blokes in the middle like Marty Tapau and Api Coruscant, they can be damaging themselves. We've seen Winterstein prove himself on edges. Sean Lane at times has his offloads. You can't negate the fact that the Trbojevic brothers, when they get their inside-outside plays going, Dylan Walker, Akili Uwate, there's guys that can hurt you. And I think just because you have to plug so many holes, and we seen last week, that's what happened to the Roosters. They just couldn't plug all those holes anymore. And I think for that reason, that's why Manly is going to get over the top. Whether it's going to be a big win, a small win, I'm not 100% sure. But regardless, I think it's going to be a Manly win. But so yeah, just looking head to head, I don't know. It sits on a dime. If the West Tigers were to upset Manly, I couldn't say I'd be surprised. But yeah, my money would be with Manly for this week. So all in all, that wraps up everything for the round 23 preview. Good luck with your tipping. Good luck with your punting if you are punting. And I'll see you at the start of next week, and we'll see how I fared. Righto, gang. Enjoy your footy, and I'll talk to you next week. Benny Matthews out. Footy Rants.